Okay, here's my Ford Escape 2001 V6 3-liter Duratec engine, AJ engine code. So you can see the fuel rail, the wiring harness with the injector plugs there. Now the reason I'm showing you this without the plenum on is because there are some very good videos of removing the plenum. You can see when I removed the plenum, I just didn't even disconnect those, I just took the clips off. Remove these 3 hoses, undid the vacuum control valve, and just undid the EGR valve, left that hanging. Move these hoses out of the way. Disconnected the throttle, and I just usually hang that out of the way somewhere. Going to use the multimeter to check the resistance of my fuel injector. I've got a reading of 15, and it should be between 17.3 and 10.3, so it's well within the range. There's my multimeter, there's the fuel injector down there. Trouble is these clips break. The little plastic retainer. So I may have to cut these and put new injector connectors, electrical connectors on there. Okay, as I've taken each one of these electrical connectors off, the actual retaining clip is snapped as I've taken them off. So I'll just show you what I mean, if you can see that around the back. I'll just push that retaining clip in, squeeze it together. When I pull it out, it's actually so brittle that the retaining clip snapped off. So I'm just going to replace all of these connectors. I'll remove all of my connections to the coils. Fortunately, they're not so brittle, so they don't break so easily. They're not so close to the head. So now, just remember the position of these cables. It's obvious this one goes furthest from the end, but on the ones on the front coils, the first connector is actually to the far right, and the last connector is to the left. This can be confusing, and if you don't set it up properly, you'll get a misfire, and the engine will fire in the wrong order. I removed the wiring harness and just pushed it out of the way. That's my fuel injector connectors there. And basically, I've got my fuel rail exposed there, and I'm going to leave the fuel rail on and the injectors intact, and just remove the whole lower intake manifold, and just kind of pull it out of the way, and not actually disconnect the fuel line. I have depressurized the fuel system though by starting the engine with and running it, and removing the fuse to the fuel pump, and it's relieved the fuel pressure now, so it should be safe to work on, even though I'm not going to disconnect any of the fuel. Just wanted to do that for safety, and I've removed the negative terminal on the battery as well. So here's what I'm going to do, is just take off these 8 bolts. And remove it, move it aside, replace the gaskets, and bolt it back into place. Then work on my electrical connectors, cutting them, splicing them, soldering them, heat shrinking again. And that'll take a while, so I'll be here for a while. Taking out the last bolt now. You can see they're quite long and a little corroded, so what I'm going to do is give them a spray. Now you can see my intake manifold's loose. Okay, lift the entire assembly without removing the fuel rail. The fuel line's still connected. Gently put this aside. And I don't know if you can see that or not, but all my gaskets are flattened out. And I can even see this is a probable cause of the leaking. Gaskets are flattened right out. Okay, there's my fuel rail and injectors, my lower manifold for the air intake. Down there's the block. And these gaskets are flattened right out. You probably can't see that, but they're almost flush, so I'm thinking it's the cause of my leaks, from my vacuum leaks and my rough idle. And start when the engine warms up, everything runs fine. When it's cold, it runs like shit. Let's get these gaskets out. See, I can get them out with a small screwdriver. I'll tell you what, I'm going to block these holes up first with some paper towels so I don't drop anything in there. Be back. Pop my new gaskets in, and if you look closely in there, you can actually see where the injectors. Let's have a closer look. See the injector nozzle right there in the middle of the screen. That's the fuel injector. Okay. And I'll just pop my gasket in place. You can see that gasket has a nice ridge on it. It's not flat on the top, it's actually arched. And just push them in place. You can almost see that ridge. The gasket's not flattened, it's poking out, so it's going to push against that aluminum engine block. I've cleaned that up. Let's put the rest of them in. You can see there my fuel line, my fuel rail, injectors, and lower manifold. They're all in place as one assembled unit. And I'll just take these paper towels out of my inlet ports and put it all back together. Paper towels out. Do that lower. It's a little bit of a wipe. Trying not to drop any junk in my inlet ports. And we'll grab the whole assembly. Carefully rotate it over. In position. I'm just holding onto the fuel rail, but I think I should really be holding the manifold itself. position when you can get the first bolt in. But before I do, I'll get some anti-seize on these bolts. Alright, I'm just getting my last bolt in place. And I'll just nib them up slightly in a cross pattern. Just a little bit firm, a bit more than finger tight. Just in a cross pattern, across every bolt. Then I'm going to get my torque wrench. Tighten them up to 11 newton meters, or about 8 foot-pounds. And I'll do that in a cross pattern as well. So here's my torque wrench. Okay, and I'll just pull that around until it clicks. I've already got it preset to 11 newton meters, and there she goes, she clicks. That's at 11. This guy's at 11. 11 newton meters. 11. I'm just doing this in a cross pattern to make sure the gaskets sit down evenly. That's 4, 5, and oops, I mean that's 6, 7, 8. Okay, just going to cut off my fuel injector clip. EPIA. Okay, I've cut that off. I'll get some wire strippers and expose that wire. I'll just cut these wires nice and short. On my new fuel injector connector, I'll just cut the wires short. Leave it enough that I've got some room to work with. Okay. I'll strip the wires on these. Now what I've done is I've made note that the red wire is the wire that's furthest away from the retaining clip. So I'll make sure that I don't cross the wires the wrong way around, otherwise I might have a real problem. That's one stripped. Okay, 2 wires stripped, and I'm just, I don't know if you can see that, yes you can. I'll just bend that wire around. And that's the one furthest away from the retaining clip. See there, I've bent the wire into a U, and I'm just going to bend the other red wire into a U, the red wire on the wiring harness to my fuel injectors and other electronic components. And I've just noticed that the clips go one way on one side, the retaining clips, and the retaining clips go one way on the other side, so the opposite way. So just make sure that when I do wire it up, it kind of faces the right direction. I think it'll just connect to the injectors better. But before I put that together, I'm going to put on one of these whiz-bang heat shrink tubes. And what these do is they solder in the middle. There's a solder there, and when you heat it up with a little blowtorch, actually solders the two wires together and heat shrinks it at the same time, sealing the wire from moisture. So we'll pop that sleeve on the red wire, push it down out of the way, bend my little horseshoe in the wire. The reason I'm doing this is because all of the retaining clips on the fuel injector connectors are broken because they've become brittle with heat. And I've got at least 150,000 miles on this car, 270,000 kilometers. So little bits of plastic become brittle. Bend my wire into a U. There's a retaining clip. Furthest wire away from the retaining clip goes to red. Red has the heat shrink tubing on it. It's hard to connect these together because my heat shrink tube is so long and the wires are so short. Okay, you get the idea. I'll put it together and show you me heating it. Slip the heat shrink tubing over the middle of the wire where they're joined, so I'll just heat that up, give it a blast with my little blowtorch and shrink it on. You can see I've already done that here. And the solder is melted in to the wire. Grab a little blowtorch. Start heating that. Whoops, burnt right through the plastic. Not supposed to do that, and the solder is melting out. I'll give that one a bit of extra electrical tape when I put it together. Seems I'm running out of gas. This is refillable, so it won't be a problem. Now you can see I've burnt right through there, and a little bit of solder is actually dripped out. Just let that cool down. It's heat shrinked and soldered at the same time. I was trying to save myself time. Okay, I've got one electrical connector to rewrap. Unwrapped these with electrical tape. And you'll notice I've got the retaining clips here all facing to the left on the back, and the retaining clips facing to the right on the front of the fuel rail. And it looks a lot like the original one, so I'm pretty happy. So I'll just wrap this one up, and we'll connect them all up. That's the bad guy there. I thought that I'd show you this again because I can show you the flat side better on a background of a light color. So you can see how flattened out that side of that gasket is, hopefully. You can see that. And that was the side against the engine block. And this was the problem. I was getting rough engine idle on cold starts. When the engine warms up, everything's fine. I've replaced idle air control valve, PCV valve, EGR valve, upper intake manifold gaskets, new spark plugs, new coils, new air filter. None of these things seem to help my rough idle, except replacing these gaskets now has completely solved that problem. And I'll just show you how my car starts to prove that. Alright, going to start my engine now. Last week I got a code mixture 2 lean on bank 2. Now I've replaced my lower manifold intake gaskets. See, I have a cold engine and no more rough idle. Just regular fuel. Just leave it a minute so it idles down, and you'll see that I just no longer have a rough idle. Before I had a sporadic, horrible jumping idle that I couldn't get rid of for 2.5 years, no matter how many parts I changed on the car. Beautiful. So happy now. Alright, that concludes our video on changing your lower manifold intake gaskets on a Ford Escape 2001.